You were an EMT before, so what was this experience like and what did you learn from it?
So the EMT life was, I've heard it described like war. It's 95% boredom punctuated by 5% really intense moments. And there's jokes around the EMT community that people are either white clouds or black clouds, depending on how much stuff takes place when they're on call. And for myself, I had a couple interesting days, but for the most part, we had really calm days when I was either on the station or in the hospital or something of the sort. I remember I did a stint at Duke University Hospital, and it was one of my first shifts. It was an overnight shift. They called it the graveyard shift and whatnot. And I distinctly remember asking the nurses, "Is it normally this quiet?" And they said, "Truth be told, no. This is the quietest shift we've had in over 2 decades. So congratulations." So do with that what you will. But big picture, working as an EMT, I guess, got me more used to high stakes situations. It got me used to depending on a team, and also, I guess, looking out for the little guys was the best way to think about it. I went into medicine, or at that time, I wanted to go into medicine with all these grandiose ambitions of being a famous doctor and cracking all these mysteries and all that stuff. And really, it was just going in there and helping a woman who broke her wrist, or helping a child who'd gotten injured or something. And granted, there's a lot more to EMT work than that, and it can definitely get really intense really quickly. Like one girl that I was in my class with, her first her first day, she had like a serious car accident and people were bleeding all over her, and she was having to resuscitate with CPR and tell, loved ones that someone had just passed away. So, in that same jargon, she was considered a black cloud just based off that. But yeah, it really humanized the work that I wanted to do, and it got me thinking about um, the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis and what life means for them, as well as for the big picture economy and systems and all that types of stuff. Does that make
If
sense?
you had, for sure, no. If you had to do it again, would you or would you choose a different route?
This is one of those catch-22 things, because it was, as much as I enjoyed working as an emergency medical technician, that was actually what caused me to walk away from being the pre-medical student that I was. And I think the biggest reason for that was realizing what I wanted to do, the kind of environment I wanted to be in. And my hat goes off to the medical professionals. It's definitely a noble profession. I have always been a very relationally driven person with the work that I did. And while I definitely got to see that in medicine, I realized if I was looking for that component in my career, there's a lot more effective ways to do that than going all the way through med school and residency internships and all those things. So I kind of needed to do it in order to discover I didn't want to do it. So I would say yes, I'd do it all again in the same way I did.
Is there a brutal reality you can give to Gen Z about the medical profession? Because, from my perspective, a lot of people just say they want to go into the medical profession without realizing what is at stake in terms of their mental health, their physical health, their emotional health,
Hmm.
how it's going to affect them in the long term and the short term. So, if a Gen Z is maybe in high school, maybe in post secondary, about to take that step, what would
Hmm.
you tell them? This is what you need to really consider. That
Hmm.
you're only going to find out once you're so deep into it that it's very difficult to get out.
Yeah, this is, I think the brutal reality is how long, like the number of hours it's going to take you to get somewhere with your career, the number of hours you're going to spend debating with people who spent 10 minutes on Google and think they know more than you about your degree, and how much you're going to, how much you're just going to slog through it, honestly, to get somewhere. Like one of the biggest turnoffs for me when I was working is I would do all this lab training, and the when I got into the wards, the doctors just really never took me seriously. And granted, I was just an EMT student, but I often found that the EMTs and the paramedics I was working with, they were super friendly. They were more than willing to take me under their wing. And there's a couple that I befriended in about 5 hours west of my school. Like we would do EMT trips all over the state. And I befriended a couple that really just showed me how things worked. And I'm very thankful for that. But when I was in the hospital systems, more often than not, the doctors had, power complexes going on. I'd say, hey, can I do this particular procedure? And they're like, have you done it before? And I was like, in the lab, literally hundreds of times. I've documented this particular exercise hundreds of times. In the field, no, not yet, but frankly, because of people like you. And they would just, oh, okay, well, when you get some experience, let me know. So you have that, you have the stereotypical gossiping nurses. Um, it's it's long hours, it's intense, and you really gotta love what you're doing. I think when I was in high school, I attended a career fair for aspiring college students in Toronto. And I'm never going to forget this. I sat in a room with hundreds of other students. This doctor hops up on stage and says, how many of you guys want to be doctors? And like 90% of the room raised their hand. And he said, I got to be honest with you guys, 80% of you guys are not going to be doctors. And I thought to myself, oh, I'm going to stick it out. I'm going to be the dedicated one who does that. And yeah, it turns out I ended up being part of the 80%. And I think the biggest reason for that is so many people don't know what's out there. They don't know what opportunities they can provide. And the vast majority of pre-medical students, they just want to help people. And they think medicine's a great way to do that. And it is, but it's not the only way to do it. And the people who survive, the ones who thrive, are the ones who just absolutely love the labor of love. And that applies to anything in life, any career you choose. You got to love what you do. But for medicine, it's especially necessary to love what you do, to be able to get up for, sleep, 4 or 5 hours a night, work 80 to 90 hours per week consistently, and do that without breaking a sweat. And that's only ramped up even further with COVID. All the things that I described were things I experienced back in 2015, 2016, 2017.
Hmm.
Fast forward 5 or 6 years with the lockdowns and hospital and all this anti-vaccine stuff. Yeah, it's the social pressures of being a doctor have only gone up since then. So,
For for sure. And one thing I wanted to ask you just before we move off of this, medical segment, if you will, but it seems like a lot of people misunderstand what health professionals and medical professionals go through on a daily basis. They
mhm,
just see the immediate reactions of doctors and nurses and EMTs, but they're not taking in the fact that it's a very taxing job mentally, physically, and
mhm,
emotionally. Long hours, power trips, gossiping. So for the
mhm,
people that, yeah, and I only experienced this, like I was visited the hospital for the first time last year for someone very close to me. And it was
mhm,
the first time that I'd been in that environment and got to see how those things are. Maybe I'm just behind the curve in that sense, which is probably a good thing. But what would you say to people who maybe don't really consider how much the medical professionals go through? Like, what would you tell them to keep in mind when they eventually do start interacting with medical professionals and get that, agitation, frustration, confusion that seems to pervade all interactions on the news, social media, etc.?
mhm. I think I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is doctors and all the medical professionals, they're human at the end of the day. They had a love for their craft and they pursued it probably farther than the average person would need to, as far as getting credentialed, international, navigating international stuff. Americans especially, if you're international trying to come to America, the bar to get into the American healthcare system is like considerably higher. Like I had friends who were trying to get into, there was a friend of mine, he had Southeast Asian roots. He was looking at a couple Singaporean med schools, and he visited some students and they're like, why? Why would you come here for med school when you live in the States? So yeah, just knowing like the amount of challenges that they've had to go through to get where they are in of itself is respectable. And as much as the news wants to spin this as like, oh, there's two sides of it. And as far as me is concerned, there's one part of media that's like, there are heroes and all that stuff. And I think most doctors are just like, we're just doing our jobs. Like there's definitely a bit of a hero worship tendency in American culture, and I think Western culture. I've seen in Canada as well. And like, yes, doctors are happy about that, but again, they're just trying to do the jobs just like everybody else. On the flip side, you have the people who think that every doctor's paid off by big pharma, and is quietly slipping Benjamins in their pocket
Yeah, yeah.
while they, oh my goodness, I just sold another pack of medicine. It's not like that either. Like there's obviously, corrupt medical professionals, but it's I think they're doing their best. And I know that sounds slightly patronizing, but it's a really complicated world. Like there's no other industry where you make a mistake, you could kill someone and then you lose your license. Like, oh, not only did you have to spend 10, 15 plus years getting all your, licenses, you make a mistake and you get sued by the wrong person, which you will get sued, and you're done. Thank you for playing. Your license and your credentials are no longer valid. So I think it's a lot more intense than most people realize. And at the end of the day, a bit of sympathy and empathy for our healthcare professionals, in my opinion, can go a long way. There's an Instagram page. I want to say her name is Vicky Chan. She's an optometrist, and she does a really good job of articulating what she experiences as a mother, as a doctor, as a social media enthusiast, on the internet with the people that she interacts with.
For sure. And we can link to them in the show notes as well so people can check that out. Let's hopefully inject more sympathy and empathy for our medical professionals, but also just in society in general. So you were an EMT and then you found entrepreneurship. Was being an EMT the thing that pushed you towards it? Was there like a seed that was planted earlier in your life
Mhm.
that made you want to go down this route eventually?
Mhm.
Where was the final like, fuck it, I'm just gonna go for it?
I think the original seeds were planted back when I was an undergrad. I When I walked away from pre-med, I think that was when the doors for entrepreneurship really opened. Like up until that point, within my university, there was a really solid undergraduate entrepreneurship program, and it was chock full of, let's call them typical entrepreneurs who have really great ideas and very little sleep and very poor grades because they're so obsessed with their idea. So I started seeing those people more and more, as I progressed through my undergrad education and started spending, I guess, more time proportionally with them by the time I was a senior. So I think the seeds were planted, I want to say sophomore year. They started germinating senior year because very quickly after I called myself ex pre-med, a very close friend of mine, he came to me and he said, "Hey, I'd like for you to do the senior entrepreneurship capstone project." And for those in my school, that was basically an opportunity. Instead of doing the engineering project that was dedicated to your particular profession, whether for myself it was bioengineering, you could hop in a class with all these other entrepreneur wannabes. I don't want to say that disrespectfully. All these, I say, entrepreneurial hopefuls, and build something that was a bit more interdisciplinary. I think that really got my feet exposed to it. That was when I realized this is definitely the direction I'm going. So then I went to grad school. I spent I guess another year and a half or so in the classroom learning how to think like a businessman. So the degree I took, it was an Master of Engineering Management from Duke University. And that was designed to take the engineers, the mathematicians, the STEM folks, and get them to think like businessmen and entrepreneurs. So at that point, when I graduated, I said, I'll venture to guess I'll be in corporate for about 2-ish years before I hop off and do my own thing. And that ended up being surprisingly accurate. I think I quit my corporate job within 1 week of my 2-year anniversary. So the
Mhm.
seeds were planted, I think, on the like Act Two, end of Act Two, beginning of Act Three in my pre-med career, and finally blossomed years later, back when I was in corporate. And I do think that was a quicker path. Like when I network with other entrepreneurs, and this is something that would be useful for Gen Z, like if you're trying to do the entrepreneurship route, um, know how few people are doing it. Like I'm almost always the youngest person by a long shot at these conventions that I go to. Like I got a couple friends who are also doing similar entrepreneurial paths, and we're all in our late 20s, but the vast majority of people that I meet are in their late 30s at best, more often than not, 40s and sometimes 50s. And that's been really awesome because it has taught me to interact intergenerationally. Like if I have a question about a relationship or the psychology of, you know, eating what I kill as an entrepreneur. Like there's tons and tons of people who are twice my age sometimes who are more than
Mhm.
happy to share their experiences. So it's if you're looking for mentorship, it's actually a really good place to find it.
Why do you think people are so, not to be disrespectful, but so old in the, when they find entrepreneurship? What is it about or getting older that makes you gravitate more to entrepreneurship,
Mhm.
in your opinion?
Yeah, and this is actually, so I'll answer this question. I do think this particular trait is something that gives Gen Z an advantage, actually, and that is most people in prior generations, they had a plan in mind. A lot of them, especially in America, you got a ton of immigrant families who came to this country and they worked their absolute hardest just to give their children, their family, a shot at a greater life. And so for a lot of them, I mean, back in the day, entrepreneurship was considerably harder. So it was not really thought that much as like, okay, we'll go to college, get the degree, get the blue collar job, whatever, and be happy with it. And this generation has the freedom to take advantage of those opportunities, but also the self-awareness to do so. Like you can read all these books that talks about how many opportunities there are, how anybody could create a company right now. And I do believe that. But there's a lot, first of all, there's a lot more to it than just simply, quitting a job and going for it. But I think the advantage that Gen Z has is maybe it's because of social media, maybe it's because of other things. They tend to be a lot more self-aware. They tend to ask a lot more deep questions sooner than people in older generations. And that's, based off a combination of factors. But the stories that I hear from entrepreneurs are very consistent. I was doing this, I was doing that. One day, I did everything I had been told. One day I got fired and I realized I have a wife and kids to feed. So I just needed to make something work, and they did. And now they're like, wow, the life of freedom that I always think about having is now something that I have, full ownership of. So I think Gen Z's ability to reflect, I think their desire for freedom is things that could propel a new generation of entrepreneurs into, the world stage if they can tap into those things well.
You said you spent 2 years. Oh, sorry. You said you took a course, and you were learning how to think like a businessman. Is that correct? Or a business person, rather. So, are you familiar with the term TLDR?
Yes, TLDR.
So what is the TLDR, just for a Gen Z that's curious, of thinking like a business person? What are the necessary bullet points to share?
Mhm. So I'll give the perspective of an engineer because that's what I came from.
Sure.
TLDR, just because you can build something doesn't mean you should.
Mm.
And I think this applies on a macro scale and on a micro scale. So when you look, like I'd see all these pitches as like within the entrepreneurship community and clinic that I was in, we would do these Shark Tank style pitches once a year or so, and then like a bunch of mini pitches, and they got marketed so aggressively. But people would come up on the stage and give ideas, and it's like, you can build this, but why? Why does this need to exist? And like what functional problem does it solve? And I think a lot of ideas out there are solutions looking for problems. And on a micro scale, when you're building, a TV screen that can more easily adapt for screen sharing or something, or, a small little gadget that let's actually, I'm not going to say that. Never mind. Like small gadgets are one thing, but, when you build an algorithm that leads to a whole 4-year cycle of election interference and debates on it, that's another question entirely. So I think the thing that I learned TLDR from all that was, yes, you have the ability to build this, but you really got to think about the psychological, sociological, economic implications of what you're building. I think US politics has given us a really good case study. And not to go off on a tangent, but if you look at Sam Altman, the guy who created OpenAI, the creator of ChatGPT, he testified in front of Congress last May, and Congress's approach to him was completely different than it was with Zuckerberg back in 2018, because there's no one in Congress that it's no secret that the US government and all the players in it did not respond well to social media. So they're a lot more focused now on making sure that they respond well to AI, especially because a lot of people think it's going to be the end of us. Now, I don't think that will be the case. There's actually evidence that's showing ChatGPT is getting stupider
Yep.
for various reasons.
Yep.
But I think, yeah, there's a book out there called, I think it's called Eat, Work, 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 Die, I think.
Mm.
And this is the most fascinating book about the differences between how entrepreneurs and to a certain extent engineers think versus everybody else. So this is a guy, he came from a liberal arts background, and I think this is one of the biggest benefits of the liberal arts. I know as an engineer, I'm supposed to rag on him, but being able to look at a particular issue, a particular idea or something, and think about how it's going to impact society. I think if you can do that, you're worlds ahead of most other entrepreneurs. And this book does a really good job of articulating what that looks like. It was written by a journalist of some kind. He goes into Silicon Valley and he just attends all these pitches and venture capitalist ideas and all this stuff. And he contrasts what people say they want to do and how they want to help the world versus how their ideas and inventions could actually impact things. Like he said, he went to one pitch about immigration, and one person threw an idea forward like, let's crowdsource who gets into the United States. And that guy thought it was a brilliant idea. And he's like, do you realize how bad this is going to be? Like if you're ugly, good luck getting into the United States. If you're, missing a limb, good luck. If you have no talents, good luck. That completely goes against what the United States stands for and is about. So yeah, just it's like a relatively quick read. I think it's like a 200 pages or so. But I think that was the most eye-opening book of, oh, this is why it matters. And this is why the ability to self-reflect, as Gen Z is good at, would play a big role, not just in your career, but also in any endeavor that you create.
You touched on AI, so I guess I'll use that as the perfect segue. So you're heavily involved in the AI industry. How did you find artificial intelligence, and what was your pathway like afterwards?
Mhm. So, attending an engineering school, it was always a buzzword. Oh, what's Elon Musk going to do? What about this really cool machine learning algorithm tool? All that stuff. It's always been in the background for the work that I do, at least. And if you break down the different types of AI, there's analytical AI, there's predictive AI, and that's looking at data from the past, drawing conclusions. Predictive moves forward and says, based off the data, here's what we're going to do. And then the one that's caught the world by storm is generative AI. And that's what we're seeing now. And I think the best description would be Jarvis over in the Iron Man movies. That's what ideally it would look like someday. And I think it'll eventually get there, especially if you look at the new extension. It's called Code Interpreter, I think, on ChatGPT. Really creative name, but it's basically like having your own personal data analyst. It's not as sarcastic as Jarvis was, but yeah, shameless plug for OpenAI there. But how it became more relevant for my career when I was working in corporate. So I was working as an internal sales consultant, I think is the most functional description for the job that I had. So I would go to these teams for this research company that I was working with, and I would talk to them and give them, I guess, suggestions or strategies. And sometimes that did involve, analyzing stuff to close their clients. So I got a lot of exposure to a lot of technology industries, and AI just happened to be one of them. When I was, building my company that I'm now running, the I guess the tool of choice was chatbots and machine learning tools, and I guess very primitive forms of AI. There's one called Dialogflow. It's open source technology available from Google, and that was my first, I guess, formal introduction to it. Baking that into some of the projects that I made, and then fast forward 18 or so months, ChatGPT comes out last November, and it's obviously been at the forefront of everybody's mind, but that's also made it a lot more accessible as well. So baking that into my other projects has been, I mean, tactically, it's pretty easy to, plug all that stuff in, but because a lot more people are interested in it and asking about what it can do, that's opened up a whole new world of business opportunities. And you can capitalize on that if you know the space, but I will say it's not just creating an e-com store completely built off of AI and then hopping that out there. There's a list of articles written by, I don't remember what his name is. They're articles or videos maybe it's a combination of both, but um, he made headwinds for launching a store entirely based off of ChatGPT. Like every decision that was made was done by ChatGPT. Every product, every listing, every description on the website, it's all built by AI. And at the first, like you can kind of watch his, the I guess it's like the technology adoption life cycle. I think that you have like
Mhm.
the, oh my God, this is amazing, and then he looks at his money in his wallet after months of doing this, and he's got like a couple $100s for all that effort. And he wraps up the series by saying, yeah, this stuff's, when the barrier to entry is that low, you definitely need to have your personal, I guess, touch on the work that you do. And I think that's the biggest misunderstanding that exists with AI, specifically for, I guess, the upcoming generation, is anybody can use these tools. The difference is who can use the tools really well versus who's just pushing buttons and copying and pasting.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. It's a tool that you need to use. Everyone has access
Mm-hmm.
to a hammer, but some people treat everything like a nail. Some people just swing the hammer around, and then some people use the hammer to build a beautiful table. I think Gen Z are fundamentally misunderstanding. And look, we've all done this. We've all adopted a technology and then misused it. That happens all the time. I mean, the first person to
Mm-hmm.
like use a car to like run over people, they were like, well, this is not what cars are used for, you know?
Yeah.
So it's very um, unsurprising that Gen Z in particular are misusing this technology. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so then let's just go there then. How are Gen Z, in your opinion, thinking about artificial intelligence? Is it a benefit to them? Is it a detriment? Is it something that they are becoming more intertwined with that is going to have more negative downstream effects that maybe it's a benefit now, but it is going to cause them, mishaps later on? What are your thoughts on this?
I think for this particular issue, I don't think there's anybody who truly, like, I guess, commercially mainstream. I don't think there's any particular people group that really understands the implications of AI, let alone how to use it or any of that kind of stuff. I think Gen Z just stands to lose the most by getting it wrong, if that makes sense. Like, I'm currently doing a sales campaign, and I'll target certain industries. And let's take the legal profession, for example. Like I can pitch AI solutions to 50 lawyers. And I like, if I filter out associate attorneys, the average attorney, they're 60s or 70s, they're really good at their craft, but they've been doing things a certain way for a certain period of time, and they have no desire to change that. Like, oh, I don't need, like, I've been told countless times, oh, I don't need AI. Like, oh, it's not going to affect me, I'm about to retire. And that's true to a certain extent. Like, yeah, if you're, 2 weeks away from retiring or something, then yeah, this whole wave of tech is not going to impact you. Your career is mostly wrapped up, and good for you. But if you're just hitting the floor with your, just getting the job market rather with your degree, yeah, you stand to be impacted a lot more by AI's presence in the job market and the skills that you bring to the table with it. Like, I read some article that pointed out how many job descriptions, even a couple of days ago, I got a buddy, um, graduated 2018, 2019. He quit his job somewhat spontaneously because the work-life balance was really bad. And he messaged me. He's like, hey, do you have any resources on Chat GPT? Because all of the job applications I'm submitting, all the descriptions require AI, generative AI, Chat GPT user experience, and I don't have any yet.
Oh
So
my
yeah,
God.
it's coming, better best get ready for it. But specifically, I think the creative thing about, people in general, and Gen Z is just the latest version of this, is how people find ways to make things work. And if, like, you can go on, I'm not sure this counts as AI, but this is technological adoption. You see this NPC replication thing on TikTok that's going around, where people will pay you like anywhere from like 50 cents to $1 to do a
Yeah.
particular something, and you just do that for hours on end,
Yeah.
and these people will make like thousands of dollars in one sitting. And I probably shouldn't even say that because that'll inspire somebody to go try it. But it's
Yeah.
like, okay, like short term, yeah, you're going to make money. Short term, it's
Yep.
going to get you a paycheck. Long term, there's no way that's good for society. Like
Hmm.
that's the physical manifestation of the worst parts of technology
For
on
sure.
stage. It's
For sure.
like I don't want to. I'm gonna use the phrase digital prostitution, but that
Wow,
might
that's a
be
beautiful term. That's a beautiful term.
might not be the best way to put it, but that articulates the point. So yeah, I think the Generation Z in particular, stands to gain the most if they can properly master this stuff because nobody knows what's going on.
Yeah.
And the people who can, I guess, lead that path and figure out like, I guess, more conventional uses for it will be the ones who dictate how this stuff gets used. Like if going back to that Senate hearing with the OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, you've got all these senators who are interested in various applications. There's that one senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. All this guy cares about is getting his sound bits and finding out the military applications. Like he has these three or four technologies in front of him. Could you, in theory, use this to bomb someone? Well, blah blah. No, 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 sir. It's a yes or no question. Well, yeah, of course you can. Okay, thank you. Have a nice day. Like all about the military applications, and that's the past generation. You know, how can we use this to ensure American prosperity and protect American freedoms and do all those things? This generation, for better for worse, doesn't have nearly as much patriotic fervor as previous ones. And that's the reason for that's a whole other conversation we can talk about later. But yeah, like the approach that Gen Z has to it, whether that's skeptical, whether that's fully embracing it, I do think there's a healthy, I guess, posture of both to have. Because obviously, you know, you don't want to completely fear and stonewall it out because you stand to, you know, tides are changing and you got to respond to that. Like even myself, I was intimidated by ChatGPT when I first used it. And I very quickly found a way to, you know, leverage it into my business. And now I can monetize it pretty well. But at the same time, like there are some kind of limits that you have to have on it. So finding that balance, I know this is a super nebulous answer, my apologies, but finding that balance for your own career, whether in the legal profession or finance or consulting or something more blue collar, finding that balance for it is going to allow Gen Z to thrive in their career. Like they say, there's a really common phrase that's bouncing around the tech world right now. It's your job's not going to get replaced by AI. Your job is going to be replaced by somebody who knows how to use AI.
Hmm.
So being able to plug those tools into your job and make you more efficient, that's what will allow Gen Z to stand out in the marketplace.
For sure. And you touched on so many great points that I just want to come back to before we move on to the next question. So we talked about influencers, but I'm going to get heated. So I'll just set that over here for just a second. But you talked about, Lindsey Graham and, the kind of static thinking that
Mm-hmm.
current, let's just call them, Congress people, bureaucrats, whatever, the people who are in positions of power right now do not fundamentally do not understand the world that we are living in. I don't think it is a very
Mm-hmm.
dynamic world. It is a very fast-paced world. It is a very technologically driven world, and that is what Gen
Mm-hmm.
Z have grown up in. They are called the digital natives for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're considering how to regulate these technologies, how to, make them more safe, make them more secure, how to have a conversation about these technologies and what the downstream societal, technological, socio-technological, economic effects will be, I think it needs to be Gen Z and millennial driven. Some baby boomers may be, the prescient baby boomers, but Gen Z need to really kind of wake up and start demanding that they are uh, they have the main voice in this conversation. Because if people who just like these people are like web 1.0 pages, they're just like static HTML that doesn't do anything. Like no one,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, why would you listen to a programmer who's only coded HTML? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, for people that don't know, HTML is like the most basic stuff. It's like you can't get anything done on HTML. Like you can't even click around. Like you would click the link and it wouldn't go anywhere. It's like, or maybe it would, but anyway, it's like, why would you listen to someone who grew up in that? You want to listen to someone who understands programming, who understands how computers work, who understands how networks work, who just understands the era that we're living in, Web 2.0, Web 3.0, etc. I think Gen Z really need to stop believing that the people in power understand how to drive our current world forward. And we need to
Mm-hmm.
take a lot more responsibility. I say we because I'm Gen Z, I'm 22. And then you
Yeah.
talked about influencers, which I just want to touch on this just for a minute. But this move towards influencing, I think, is the most poisonous thing of our generation. I don't understand why so many teenagers and young adults um, are putting down uh, all of their time and energy towards an application that is probably not going to exist within 10 to 15 years, but also towards a career that's not going to exist within 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
If a Gen Z, if every time I hear about a Gen Z, being an influencer or like dropping out of high school, dropping out of college to pursue influencing, I'm like, do you think you're still going to be doing this at 65? What
Mm-hmm.
about 40? What about
Mm-hmm.
30? Because if it's no to 30, then why are you doing it?
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to my partner the other day, and I was telling her, like, why would you pursue YouTube and then
Mm-hmm.
have that fail and then go to like an employer with like a resume that's like, okay, you dropped out of college and you did YouTube. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
where is the logic in that? And I know people are going to get upset and people are going to say, respect everyone's career path. Some people may make it, but it's a very small minority that are going to
Mm-hmm.
make it. It's a very small pool of people that will have the talent and the attractiveness and the
Mm-hmm.
consistency in order
Yep.
to be that those in order to be successful on these platforms. That's what a lot of people need to realize, is that influencing is not a long-term strategy for success. It's just not.
Mm-hmm.
You need to stop using Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat and Threads and all of these other social platforms. Be real. You need to like develop your skills, because there are AI
Mm-hmm.
influencers now. There's like literal artificial intelligences, sorry, AI avatars rather, that are more attractive than you. They are more consistent than you. They won't get old or gray hair or a pimple or anything of the sort. And they have amassed millions of followers. How do
Mm-hmm.
you compete with that as an influencer? I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, just things people need to think about. So anyway, my rant is over. So how do Gen Z deal with automation? Because that's the fundamental thing. Because right towards the end, you were saying that you're not going to be replaced with artificial intelligence, but you're going to be replaced by someone who knows how to utilize artificial intelligence in the most productive and efficient way possible. So
Mm-hmm.
should Gen Z be worried about automation, or is automation a kind of um, necessary step that they could take? If you get what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying.
I think it's a necessary step they should take. As far as which jobs are getting replaced, I mean, I think for every industry that gets created, like some jobs are forced to go the way of the dinosaur, and other jobs, spring from the ashes like the phoenix, if you will. I think of copywriters as a really good example. And this is, I guess this use case is one where like I say this and I don't quite know. I think most people are just not figuring out the limits of Chat GPT. Like there's reams of articles out there, and I know a couple copywriters who've had to pivot very quickly into a new field because Chat GPT basically, flatlined their client base. There's And this like for companies who just want to save money, like yeah, you can use it to get Chat GPT, but the challenge with Chat GPT is like if you don't know how to use Chat GPT, and it is a skill, you're gonna get, garbage prompts, garbage in, garbage out, as they say. If you know how to get Chat GPT to sound like you, like based off even certain information, even certain descriptions and whatnot, then you can use that to streamline your work a lot faster than someone who just says, give me a rough draft of an email, and then you make those tweaks to it. So for a lot of the articles that I've seen about these copywriters that that lose their work. Like I think there's one instance, this one person, she had 10 clients and then it whittled down to like one. And then one of them rehired her because they weren't satisfied with the work that ChatGPT was producing. I think that's going to be a lot more common than not, as people realize the limits of this stuff. Like it's not a magic black box. Like it has, at this point, it has limitations on what it can do. I mean, that's changing every day and it's getting better at what it does. Like, I don't know if you've looked at that AI tool called Midjourney, the one that creates images.
Yeah. Yeah.
My God, I
Insane.
use that. Yeah, like I used it like 2 months ago, and then I was on a client call, and I'm using it for a prospective customer a couple days ago, and like the difference, even in just a matter of months, it's like you could genuinely like not know if this was a real image or not. It's just so
Mhm.
well done. But yeah, as far as the career, I think of I think of that phrase that was bounced around, especially during the Obama administration. It's like, learn to code, you'll be replaceable. And
Mm.
I think learning how to automate or learning how to use these AI tools is the next version of that. And maybe eventually it will get replaced by something else because, you look at Silicon Valley right now, there's a bloodbath of, I think, well over 100,000 people lost their jobs. And I think this is just one more reason why people are going towards entrepreneurship. Like you could talk about, oh, your job got automated or whatnot, but I guess the cruel irony of this stuff is a lot of the people who went to college and were told that this is going to be your ticket to economic prosperity. First of all,
Yeah.
you know,
That's a
that's, you know,
crime.
that's
It
a
should be a
crime
crime.
that, that itself is an issue, but also like the types of jobs that are getting automated are not the ones that people thought in all the sci-fi books. Like people
Mm.
thought, oh, blue collar work's going to get automated and the white collar work, the coding, the consultants, the office jobs, those will stay. And it's actually the reverse. Like the blue collar work is actually a lot harder to automate without hardware. With software, yeah, you can replicate not everything a consultant does, but it puts a lot more pressure on the white collar workers than the blue collar workers. Now, do with that what you will, but yeah, the software engineers, the consultants, the coaches, all those guys who thought they had job security because they went to college, it's like, well, this tool's upending that, and you now have to find some way to adapt, either build this in your skill set or suffer the consequences. And unfortunately for Gen Z, they stand right at the crossroads of that. You can't retire your way out of it. You don't have a lot of backing to, maintain clients or relationships that can allow you to effectively cheat and not use it as much. You are at the beginning of your career and you got to learn how to use that stuff or you will be passed by in opportunities, which sucks, but
Yeah.
that is the world we live
It does suck, but it's also an opportunity for them. And
in. Mm-hmm.
when people complain that ChatGPT is disrupting education, my immediate response is we all think that education was static anyway. It was
That's
useless anyway. It's
mm,
it's obvious that if you're going to have a static curriculum, you know, who cares about the Pythagorean theorem? None of us have
mm,
used that. We don't
yep.
use it. We're not going to touch it. Teach me about like
Mm-hmm.
taxes. Teach me like self-defense. Like people, it's like Gen Z, and you talk about the self-awareness. Gen Z are giving recommendations of what they want to learn in their own educational curriculum. How absurd
Mm-hmm.
is that? And so you
Mm-hmm.
you people are not you, but people are complaining that ChatGPT is so disruptive and Gen Z are using it to write their essays and they're using it to get, their homework done. Yeah, obviously, they weren't learning anything anyway. It's like
Mm-hmm.
that the essays are, you're not going to read the essays. The essays are just like boilerplate, you're just supposed to write it. Why would
Mm-hmm.
you expect these people to care? You're not
Mm-hmm.
invigorating them. Like, you're not even using podcasts or other educational material. Like, show a Gen Z class a Lex Friedman podcast once.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, it's such a no-brainer. But again, if you're going to continuously hold institutions in like a static sense, you're going to get a technology eventually that's so disruptive that you have to fundamentally change it. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, um, I'm gonna go off on a tangent again about Gen Z and education. But yes, no, 100% I agree. Gen Z should think of artificial intelligence as an opportunity, but also keep in mind that a lot is changing. And so just thinking about what to do for the next 5 years
Mhm.
is not the solution. You need to constantly be updating yourself. The technology is always changing, new things are evolving, new pathways are emerging, jobs are also adding artificial intelligence into their job description. So staying up to date with
Mhm.
that is all very important, and people are not thinking about AI in this way. They're just like shit scared, and you shouldn't
Mhm.
be, is what I guess we're trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay, last two questions. This is the Gen Z Diplomat podcast. You're 1996, 1995,
95.
95.
Yes.
So you're a millennial, like just at the
Yes.
tail end, like a
Tail end of
zillennial kind
millennials.
of. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So from what you have seen in society, which is a broad term, what advice do you have for Gen Z?
I think I don't want to say like I hear this phrase, it's like behind every cynic is a broken-hearted idealist. And I think I've lived my life in accordance with that. I think Gen Z has the potential to disrupt a lot of stuff, and they kind of are in ways that nobody can really ignore. Like, I mean, even looking at the world stage as a whole, 20, 30, 40 something years ago, just using a political example, America was the indisputably like economically the best place to be in every metric out there: quality of life, affordability, potential to earn money, all those things. And now 40 years, the people who still think like that are missing out on the rest of the world, because so many of those countries are catching up economically to the States. You still have America being the biggest markets and whatnot, but it's no longer the only option. And politicians are kind of trying to figure out, how do we handle this in a post USA world. So I guess that ties back in Gen Z, is the world's at your fingertips. There's a lot of great opportunities out there, and I think the Gen Z generation, equipped with their skills, is uniquely positioned to take advantage of it. Like, yes, it's unfortunate that they're all digital natives. Like, I know my generation might be one of the last ones to, because I think I got my first cell phone when I was in eighth grade. I didn't start using YouTube until ninth grade. And I look at my life now, it's like, dang, I really miss the level of focus that I had as a middle schooler when I was doing my assignments. Like, I
For sure.
distinctly remember the first time I put music in during a homework session. I was like, wow, and life's never been the same since then. But yeah, Gen Z has a unique set of skills. I sounds like that Taken movie right now with Liam
Yeah, I
Neeson.
was gonna say.
Yeah, Gen Z has a particular set of skills, and for a lot of these tools, because they have mass adoption, most of them don't have. I mean, some of them do. The ones in their early parts of their career have spending power, but they definitely have the influence and the self-awareness to leverage that influence. So use that wisely, for better or for worse. It's like, again, quoting other pop culture, you have Uncle Ben and Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. Um, you guys are going to shape the world in the next 30, 40, 50 years. Be very mindful of that. Be aware of what previous generations have done, and learn from the mistakes as well. Like, there was a professor when I was at Duke. um, this guy was a very passionate professor. He taught us management, which is definitely more soft skill, but he would get so emotional when talking about previous generations, because he'd be like, because this guy was like in his 50s or 60s. He would say, like, my generation screwed up the world, but your generation is going to fix it. And I think having such an optimistic view, no strings attached, is suboptimal. Like, he would look at all of our classroom, and we were all, I think most of us were all millennials. And I was like, dude, my roommate sold me out like 2 days earlier for $20. Like, he said, oh, I've got this table for you. I'm going to give it to you for free. And then he reneges on it and gives it to somebody else for $20. It's like, you're going to tell me with a straight face that this generation is going to change the world because we care about these solutions. Just like, no more than that. Like, we're all in the lab, we're in the classroom, we care. We've not yet been exposed to the world. I'm sure every person who's left their classroom wanted to change the world in a positive way, wanted to do something amazing. And fast forward, the allure of money just became too much for most people. So I think I'd say for Gen Z, if you're going to change the world in a positive way, you need to have your morals down pat, because if your morals fade out when they're pressurized, they're not morals. They're trending
Hmm.
ideas and philosophies to have that don't mean anything. So know what you're about, stick to what you're about, and that's when you'll start seeing the positive change that most of the world is looking for at this point. Does that make sense?
If your morals fade when they're pressurized, they're not morals at all.
Yes.
Wow, that's I'll take that. You were talking about the USA not being the only option. Just if you could touch on that, what other countries look good to you?
This depends on what you want to get out of life. I mean, I could send you hundreds of hours of podcasts talking about this from what I've researched over the years. Um, the most recent one I can think of is a podcast from Patrick Bet-David, Valuetainment. He did an
Yes.
interview. He did an interview with this. I only saw the clips. I don't remember. All I know about the guy is he was from Mexico. Like, I got to watch the whole podcast, but they were reading a clip and it said, like, I think 3,000 more Americans have moved to Japan in the last couple years. And
Oh,
this
was
Latin
it recent?
American, yeah, like a couple days ago,
Oh,
recent.
Dave Smith.
Dave Smith. Okay. So he took a very grandstand approach and said, why flee the country when you can make it better? Like gun violence. Oh, he gave a very just do what I did kind of approach. And granted, I don't know his background, but I'm going to assume that he's doing reasonably well if he's on Patrick Bet David's
Yeah,
podcast.
for sure.
But he's like, I was raised in Mexico and I took my family here. And if you don't like the gun violence, just move to a safer place. Just get a safer resort. It's like, first of all, um, not like your whole life's not going to be a result. You eventually have to leave the resort. And if your city's burning itself down, it doesn't matter how safe your resort is. But to specifically answer that question, it depends on what you're looking for and the quality of life you're looking for. Like the East Asian countries, from my experience and the experience of my close friends who've lived there, they're super welcoming. They're super respectful. The work-life balance is, questionable, and overall it's a much more safe place to be, but you will never be accepted. Like if you move to Japan, you will never be accepted as a Japanese person. Contrast that with the Philippines, where like they like adopt you into the unofficial Philippine family
Yep,
real quick. So if you're looking for cost of living, honestly, South America is probably a really solid bet. Costa
for
Rica,
sure.
Panama is like Miami for all intents and purposes. It's like that whole country has really been influenced by America, for better for worse, because of the canal. And you can definitely see that in their culture, even though America doesn't have as much of a presence there as it once did. So cost of living, I guess leisurely way of going about things, more type beat style, would definitely be South America. East Asia, Southeast Asia would both be good for, I don't want to say solid work environments, because most of the people in over there eventually left. If you want to just do nothing but work your career, you're probably better off staying in America, honestly. Family life, East Asia, work environment, as far as like having equal balance, you're probably better off in Europe. Like these
Hmm.
guys, it's damn near impossible to fire somebody in the European economy. There's so many unions, there's so many workers' protections, and that's one of the biggest differences between USA and Europe. And I think there's a ton, like when I look at the statistics, especially in light of COVID, there's been a ton of people emigrating to Europe, like Californians moving to Portugal, being a really good example. Like Europe has a lot of the creature comforts that America does, but the gun violence is, and don't quote me on the stats here because I haven't looked into this, but the culture of guns in Europe is very different from that in the United States. Like I was in Europe about 8 or 9 months ago. I attended a convention in Scandinavia, and everybody I met was like, "Oh, you're Canadian American. That's awesome. What is up with you guys and guns?" And I'm like, it is what it is. Like, I mean, we can rant about guns in another conversation. Won't bother getting into that now,
Yeah.
but yeah, and like it's kind of like, take your, whatever flavor of life you want. Like America's a pretty well-rounded place, and at this point in history, America is still arguably one of the best places to build a business. That being said, it's dropping, a couple percentage points every year on the World Economic Freedom Index. Every year, a bunch of world economists analyze what is every country good at and how does that lead to good quality life. America has been dropping 1 or 2 points every year for like the last 5 years. So Yeah, depending what you're looking for, Europe's good for quality of life. Just overall good society that's relatively peaceful and riot free. The Asian countries are your best bet. I guess relaxed life, South America, and we can go into more specific like individual countries if you want later on. But I guess that's the world picture of what themes you can see across the world.
For sure. I think a recurring theme of this episode is that Gen Z have options that they need to
Yes.
explore. Okay,
Mhm.
last question for me. I just want to say this has been a fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed it, but learned a lot as well.
Likewise.
This is more of a personal question. We talked offline about it, but what did Chadwick Boseman mean to you?
Chadwick Boseman, I think the poetic way to describe it is his end was my beginning. And for the listeners who are not familiar with the one-on-one conversation that Aisha and I had, so Chadwick Boseman passed away unceremoniously of stomach cancer, I think, at the ripe age of 43 back in COVID. Like I was on vacation in Canada, helping a friend move up there. We took a week off and went to Quebec City. And I distinctly remember sitting in the hostel bunk bed that I was in, seeing a tweet that said, Marvel star Chadwick Boseman has passed away. And that really shook me because he was one of my favorite actors and I really looked up to him as a person. But I started doing some research on him, his philosophy in life and how he lived his life. And he was a really strong Christian. My sister sent me an article about some graduation speech that he gave, and he said in the speech, "When I die, I want to look God in the face and say I did everything I could. Every ounce of blood, sweat, tears that I gave, I left nothing on the table. I did it all for you." And for myself, also being a Christian, that really resonated me from a big picture of, what am I doing with my life? But just on a more secular level as well. Ask yourself, are you happy with what you're doing? Are you happy with the potential that you have? I mean, every like the special thing about the tail end of millennials and Gen Zers is that we were complimented a ton growing up. We were told we were special. We were told we could do all those things. And whether that's true or not is besides the point. The point is like everybody's exceptionally gifted at something. Like there's something that they have that, could solidify their brand if they knew how to leverage it and all those types of things. And I think Gen Z is pretty good at asking this question. The next step is, okay, so what are you going to do with that? So for myself, knowing I had all these skills that were not being used as effective as I wanted them to in corporate, combined with his philosophy, is what led me to quit my job and start my business. So for the audience trying to, I guess, make this relevant for yourself, I'd say you've been told a great many things. I know you've got a lot of skill sets. So what are you doing with that? And are you using them in a way that benefits society, that makes you happy, that leads to the positive changes you're looking for? If you are, keep doing that. Keep being persistent because consistency is the most important part. If not, then ask yourself why. Ask yourself what changes would you need to make to your own life in order to make it the life that you want. Maybe that does involve moving. Maybe that does involve protesting. But I think there is a difference between waiting for the government to solve issues or trying to change a particular economic policy versus either fixing the problem yourself or going somewhere that doesn't have the issue. Like, so I became a US citizen in late 2021. And the thing that always rubs me wrong when I talk to certain Americans about, mostly Republicans, about this country is they say, oh, if you don't like it here, then go somewhere else. And as I've come to appreciate more, I've come to agree with that more than I thought. Not for the same reasons that Republicans would say. Like I guess the philosophy there is like America's a great country. It's flawless. It's there's nothing wrong with it. If you don't like it, you can go back to where it came from. My response is if you don't like something in America, there are 192 other countries in the world that you can choose from. Go pick one. And like this is not you'll see how great it is in America, just come back. No, like there are countries, like if America's too racist for you, if the money scale is too bad, there are countries out there, like every country's got their problem. But if your sole goal is fixing this problem, there is a country out there that's made more progress than America has. Go find it and kick your life off there. Like you're in Canada, and one thing that Canada has that America doesn't, there are give or take 5 years ahead of America as far as social issues and social progress goes. And there's plenty of other countries like that have figured something out that America has not yet figured out. Like, granted, there's a lot more into this than just what I'm saying, but like Japan and their bullet trains, all of Asia with their bullet trains, America's
Yeah.
not yet figured that out. So
Yeah.
if there's one particular issue that you cannot live with, find another place and pick up your life over there. And a buddy of mine, like we joked about, because everybody says like, oh, I can't move. And this, it is a trendy thing to hit on America and not do anything about it.
Yeah.
But my buddy said, and he's, I think in his mid 30s, he's traveled all over the world. He's lived in Japan, he's lived in Guam, he's lived in Europe, he's lived in Africa. And he says, people who talk about why they can't move, they just don't have enough incentives to move. Like, to all those people that say they can't leave America for reasons XYZ, you give them $10 million to leave America and never come back, a lot more people will take you up on that offer than you think. The issue in that instance is just they need the right incentives to go. So that's my spiel.
Yeah, no, Mark, you are full of wisdom, and I really hope that this conversation resonates with a lot of Gen Z and maybe some millennials, uh, you know, to consider their options more critically. This has been an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed it with you. So we are speaking to Gen Z. Where can they find you in the digital realm?
So my personal email is mark.bartel@blueoceanautomators.com. My website is blueoceanautomators.com, but the best place to reach me will either be through there or through LinkedIn, but I check the email much more frequently. So shoot me an email if you want to talk.
For sure. And we'll leave all these links in the show notes. Mark, thank you so much for this conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.